Good morning, you're watching The Mint and I'm Andy Hodges. Let's have a quick look at African currencies, commodities, basic commodities, metal and energy prices. On the first day of 2020, we took you back to what affects you and me in the budget announced by Professor Ntuli Ngube, the Minister of Finance of Zimbabwe. This morning, we will look at some aspects of the 2020 budget announcement affecting business as from the 1st of January 2020. Zimbabwe's 2020 national budget was officially unveiled by the Minister of Finance, Professor Ntuli Ngube, on November the 14th, 2019. On the basis of various fundamentals and assumptions, the government expects an economic recovery this year with projected growth of 3%. This is in line with the 2020 national budget priorities of growth and productivity, job creation, competitiveness, and strong, sustainable and shared development. Effective 1st January 2020, the intermediate money transfer tax IMTT and bulk payments on mobile platforms were revised upwards. Let's listen to what the minister said.
I propose to review the tax-free threshold from the current $20 up to $100, from $20 to $100, and the maximum tax payable per transaction by corporates from the current $15,000 to $25,000 for transactions with values exceeding $1.25 million. Let me turn to bulk payments through mobile banking platforms. For the avoidance of doubt, all bulk payments through mobile money banking platforms attract intermediated money transfer tax, except where such payments relate to remuneration. I therefore propose to exempt from IMTT social transfers by development partners accredited in terms of the Privileges and Immunities Act.
A marginal reduction on corporate interest rate was also proposed in the budget with the aim of encouraging growth and productivity.
Enhanced productivity and economic growth requires substantial investment in capital equipment, improved production techniques, and modern technology. Lowering the tax burden is also instrumental in increasing the return on equity. I therefore propose to review the corporate tax rate from the current 25% down to 24%, with effect from 1 January 2020. And that is a cut of 1%.
In support of employment generation, the Minister of Finance introduced some tax relief measures to the business world.
Introduce a tax credit of $500 per month per employee for corporates that employ additional employees in a year of assessment. The credit will, however, be limited to a maximum of 60,000 Zimbabwe dollars per year of assessment. This is subject to review. The support framework will be published through regulations, will target employers who meet the following conditions among others. 1, the company should be registered for personal income tax and be compliant for the preceding tax period. 2, the tax credit will only be claimed after the additional employee has served a period of 12 consecutive months. Employees should be aged 30 years and below at the time of employment. For the purposes of the incentives, employee excludes trainee, intern, and apprentice. The minimum wage payable to new employees should be at least $2,000 per annum. The tax credit will not apply to supervisory grades. The tax credit will not apply to corporates with a turnover exceeding an equivalent of $1 million because we recognize that the biggest employers tend to be the middle tier, which have a turnover below $1 million equivalent. This again is subject to adjustments. It's the first time we are doing it, so we'll be ready to fine-tune it as we go along. This measure, which takes effect on 1 January 2020, will reduce employers' cost of hiring young people through a cost-sharing mechanism.
Zimbabwe expects to increase diamond production to 11 million carats by 2023 from 3.2 million carats recorded in 2018. This is part of an ambitious plan to raise mining output and earn the country $12 billion a year. Currently, diamond miners are exploiting conglomerate deposits, hence the cost of extraction has significantly increased. In recognition of these high costs, the government reduced royalties on diamonds effective 1st January 2020.
To promote investment in exploration and extraction, I propose to review the royalty on diamonds from 15% down to 10% of gross revenue with effect from 1 January 2020.
The President of Zimbabwe, Edie Mnangagwa, in his New Year's speech declared that 2020 will be the year of higher productivity, economic growth and job creation, a statement that was in line with the 2020 budget pronouncement. And I quote, "Going forward, 2020 will be the year of higher productivity, economic growth, job creation and satisfying the needs of the people. We cannot live in the past, we can only learn from it. We must craft a future benefiting from the wisdom of the past." Productivity growth and employment generation planned for this year might be within the reach of business and the people of Zimbabwe, especially if power supplies improve, fiscal discipline and re-engagement with the international community firms up. Now, is Zisco Steel a sleeping giant? Well, the mineral-rich southern African nation Zimbabwe sees the mining sector as the main driver for reviving the economy. Amongst issues affecting mining in Zimbabwe is the closure of Zisco Steel, known to have huge iron ore deposits estimated at over 36 billion tons of reserves. Zisco, once a major foreign currency spinner, used to produce about 1 million tons of steel per year. Bukwa and Ripple Creek have deposits with high-grade ore, whilst other significant ironstone deposits include the huge Mwanezi deposit west of Chivu and Nyunyi near Mashvingo. Zimbabwe's government has set ambitious targets on mining production, although stable output is yet to be met. Investors have also been cited unfavorable investment regulations and are still staying away for now.
So appetizing out there, but the policies, our policies, are the ones that debilitate against us. At one point, one of Europe's largest companies, I don't know when that was, came in here. That was Mites Steel. They came in here, they wanted Zisco Steel. And I remember back then that they had offered something like $750,000.
Million, I heard, yeah?
$750 million, yes. You know,
and that deal fell apart.
That deal fell apart. And you know, if you look at, or if you want to analyze why it fell apart, that if we look into it closely, we would have by now, you see, we're looking at time lost, we would have by now resuscitated Redcliffe as a town. We could have, if we, see, at times the powers that be, they become so myopic, they won't even look at beyond what they're. A table of $750 million or $1 billion, look at the ripple effects once you implement that project.
Government had an agreement with a Chinese investor, R&F, for the $1 billion revival of former steelmaking giant Zisco. This deal, however, collapsed in December 2019. Government contends that no individual company should be allowed to have such huge ownership of a strategic resource at the exclusion of other potential participants or investors, because it is impractical for a single entity to commercially and optimally develop the mineral. Arguably, differences with prospective Indian investor Xtra Holdings over iron ore rights was partly to blame for the collapse in 2015 of an agreement that had been signed with government in 2013 to revive Zisco. Xtra planned to build a new steelworks complex, replacing the antiquated plant, and exported it via a terminal to what it wanted to build in the port of Beira, Mozambique. Apart from the mineral claims held by Zisco's subsidiary, some of the assets that have not been factored when the deal was negotiated include the company's large real estate and a huge stockpile of scrap metal with an estimated value of $40 million. In its quest to open up the domestic industry to other players, the government of Zimbabwe recently granted Chinese stainless steel giant Tsingshan a special grant for iron ore mining rights in Chuvu, Mashonaland East Province. This was to enable the Chinese company to establish a stainless steel manufacturing plant in an estimated $1 billion investment. Zisco closed operations in 2008 after facing operational and financial challenges. By the year 2000, Zisco was operating without a full board. Its blast furnaces were no longer functional, while its plants and equipment were now obsolete. As of early 2008, one of Africa's largest steelmaking company was producing less than 12,500 tons, far below the break-even capacity of 25,000 tons. In the latest news plaguing the resuscitation of the company, the Zisco board has resolved to terminate the controversial takeover deal of some of the firm's key assets by Zim Coke, an investment vehicle fronted by businessman Eddie Cross, on suspicion the transaction was flawed. Zim Coke bought Zisco assets related to the production of coke on the understanding that when the steel plant is revived, it will get its coke needs from Zim Coke. The transaction was a debt-asset swap involving Zisco assets and Zisco Steel debt owed to the German bank KfW GmbH in Frankfurt. Cross claims that the Zisco debt was valued at the time of the transaction at $225 million, but will exceed $350 million by the time the debt is expunged by payments from Zim Coke. Several people with the knowledge of the deal, however, revealed that the Zisco board resolved to terminate the deal, citing serious corporate governance inadequacies, since the arrangement was entered into without the knowledge of the former board, led by former CBZ Holdings chief executive Nyasha Makuvise. In 2018, the government took over both the external and domestic debt of Zisco of nearly $500 million, as it sought to clear its balance sheet and attract investment. Zisco Steel owed $212 million in external loans, $6 million to external suppliers, $57.6 million in domestic loans, and over $219 million to domestic suppliers. The revival of Zisco Steel is of paramount importance to Zimbabwe, not only so the country can reduce its importation of iron and steel, but also the downstream effects on the economy and the reopening of Zisco will generate. As a low-hanging fruit in the mining sector, this asset is definitely one of those. Mexico is planning to build a Hyperloop to travel between Mexico City, Querétaro, León, and Guadalajara, linking a super region that is expected to include more than 60 million people by 2050. The transportation system will be called MexLoop. Mexican FREE won a contest to design the system. They will work with Hyperloop One on the project. The MexLoop will dramatically shorten travel time. Driving from Mexico City to Guadalajara takes over 6 hours. The MexLoop could make the same trip in just 45 minutes. FREE says they envision the concept to be adapted for use around the world. Now, Zimbabwe's current main form of countrywide transportation is either by bus, train, or commuter omnibus. The Zimbabwe government introduced a subsidized urban mass transport system in 2019, giving relief to commuters who were being charged exorbitant fares by commuter omnibus operators who enjoyed a virtual monopoly. The Zimbabwe United Passenger Company, ZUBCO, through a strategic arrangement with private players, coordinates the new transport system that will cover all suburbs in Harare that is also extended to other towns and cities in the country. There is a daily train service that runs from the second city Bulawayo to the capital Harare, and a train to Victoria Falls and Mutare. However, commuters have complained that some services are erratic. Zimbabwe deregulated the urban transport system in 1992 to allow anyone with a large or small bus to ferry commuters. After deregulation, transport operators opted to invest in cheaper small buses and commuter omnibuses. Unfortunately, the commuter omnibus operators failed to regulate themselves to instill professionalism into the sector. The public transport system in Harare has proven to be a nightmare for residents of the capital. Motorists and pedestrians have suffered at the hands of both commuter omnibuses and illegal pirate taxis, commonly known as mashika-shika. The combi business has become the most rowdy sector in the country, with the law of the jungle as their modus operandi. A proper urban transport system should have a mix of trains, large and small buses. Zimbabwe is the only country, with Harare the only city in the region, that entirely depends on a private public transport system. So what needs to be done? Well, what is key is the implementation of a dependable public transport system and meticulous town planning. A number of issues need to be addressed when it comes to the transport system, among these being safety, congestion and pollution. So it is now on government and the private sector to invest in railway and conventional buses if Zimbabwe is to have an efficient public transport system. Government has approved an increase in public hospital charges, but no one will be turned away for failing to raise the fees, while the free maternity services policy remains in place. The upward review of medical costs comes into effect on the 1st of January, has already drawn public outcry, with stakeholders saying the fees are beyond the reach of many. Consultation fees for adults receiving treatment at Paranyatwa group of hospitals are up from $15 to $200 for initial consultation and $130 for subsequent visits. Children above 5 years will now pay $100 as initial consultation and $60 for reviews. In other central hospitals, initial consultation for adults and children have been pegged at $160 and $80 respectively. Adults and children accessing treatment from provincial hospitals will be required to pay initial consultation fee of $120 and $60 respectively, while district hospitals will charge $80 for adults and $40 for children above 5 years. Health and Childcare Secretary Dr. Agnes Mahomva explained, maternity services remain free of charge. Government policy remains that of free healthcare to pregnant women, lactating women, children under the age of 5 years, adults over 65 years. While confirming that adjustments to other healthcare costs were triggered by the economic situation, Dr. Mahomva reiterated that no one will be turned away without receiving treatment because of failure to raise the required amount. She said the adjustments were meant to ensure that health institutions break even in this current economy. Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Health Chairperson Dr. Ruth Laborde said government could not punish its own citizens because of the current inflationary environment without equally matching salaries. She said Parliament will be calling on officials from the Ministry of Health and Childcare to explain and justify the increases. She stated that hospitals belong to the people and they ought to get the service at the most affordable cost. For all these plans put in place by the Ministry of Health and stakeholders, the hospitals and other health institutions have to have adequate manpower to provide the necessary service for those with ill health. Access to health care is a basic human right. Section 76(1) of Zimbabwe's constitution states that every citizen and permanent resident of Zimbabwe has the right to access basic health care services, which include reproductive health care services, and Section 76, Section 3 states no person may be refused emergency medical care in any healthcare institution. Well, I'm Andy Hodges and you've been watching The Mint. Please follow us on our Facebook page, Zim Papers TV Network, our website, ztn.co.zw, and on YouTube under ZTN. Your comments are welcome via our Twitter handle @ZTN News and, of course, on Facebook. Join us here on The Mint every weekday morning at 6 a.m. Central African Time. All that's left for me to say is goodbye, have a profitable business day, and you all be safe.